Welcome to Conveyancing Matters with Lorraine and Stu. Join us for a chat about all things property.
Hello. Noel Hunter, you're back on Conveyancing Matters. How the hell are you?
I'm well, thank you, Lorraine. Nice to see you again.
Likewise. And how are you doing, Stu?
I'm all good, thank you, Lorraine. How about yourself?
Yes, I'm all right, thank you. I'm really delighted to see Noel back from the Consumer Code for Home Builders. Noel, you came onto the show a little while ago now, and I felt we had more conversation to be had out of you, and in particular, of course, in relation to the shiny new Homes Code that's going to be coming forth. And I thought, therefore, perhaps a good place to start, particularly perhaps for the benefit of the people that didn't watch your first outing, is if, Noel, you could give us just a very brief synopsis of the Consumer Code for Home Builders, with which you've been involved for the last 11 years, and the broad purpose of that code. But then what I would really like to talk about, and I'm sure Stu will have some comments, particularly from the developer side, is the fact that we've in the pipeline is the new Homes Quality Board, Noel, and we are going to therefore have two codes running side by side, and I do think that might create a bit of confusion in the market. So I think your insight there would be incredibly helpful. So would you just give us a brief synopsis first about the current Consumer Code for Home Builders?
Yes, the code, as you said, has been operating now for about 11 years, and it was set up to protect the buyer during the pre-purchase, purchase, and post-purchase process of buying a new home. Obviously, buying a new home is a major event for any individual, probably the biggest purchase they'll ever make. And it's also one where they have very little experience because they don't buy homes very often. So they need really all the help they can get. So the code was therefore set up to protect them during that process, to make sure they got the right information pre-purchase, the right information at exchange of contract, clear descriptions of the property, exactly what it was they were buying, no surprises, and the opportunity, if indeed there was a problem with the property, maybe the description changed during the build process, where they could actually pull out of the contract without any detriment to them. And post-sales, if there were issues that arose post-sales, they had somewhere to go to deal with those issues. And indeed, we've had, of course, many consumers come to us to bring complaints over the years, although many of the complaints are dealt with by the builder before they get to us, which is good news. And we've encouraged builders over that period to have their own complaints processed and to deal positively with consumers so it doesn't become a vexatious issue.
And would you say, Noel, I mean, what would you say over the last 10 or 11 years have been what have been the main sort of content, subject matter of the sort of complaints and issues that you've had to deal with once it's got to yourselves? What would you say would be the one or two sort of primary, as I say, problems?
Well, mainly it's about description. What the property is described as when it's bought, and how it looks when it's passed over to the consumer. Differences in description about the property itself, or indeed the contents of the property, perhaps the way the kitchen has been fitted or whatever. Those sort of issues are quite prominent in the complaints we get. But also things like the way in which money's been handled, the reservation agreement, for example, when there's a reservation fee put down. Sometimes people want to pull out at some stage and haven't been returned the reservation fee that they've paid up front. So we've had problems of that kind as well. So they've run into quite a few hundred over the years. We're dealing with about 150 cases a year at the moment, something of that nature.
And and how many new builds sell a year? That sounds like a small proportion.
Yeah, it is a small proportion that actually reach us, which have got to the vexatious stage where they need independent dispute resolution. As you probably remember from our previous discussion, we have an independent dispute resolution service, which is entirely independent of us and operates really like an ombudsman, and deals with the consumer, deals with the builder, and comes to a resolution. And that resolution then should be honoured by the builder and accepted by the consumer.
I'm really surprised at that volume. I would have thought that it would be way more than that. It's where we do a lot of new build here, and the most common complaints we get following completion are things such as the location of. So it could be the location of whether it be radiators, whether it be a window that's actually not quite on where it was on the original plans. This sort of stuff that we see is all to do with location. The location of bits and bobs in the kitchen, and where the oven and extractor fan were or ought to have been. We get that quite regularly. So I'm really surprised at that number. I thought it would have been way in excess of that.
Well, a lot of the sort of snagging issues which come up post-build are dealt with by the builder on site. It's only when there is a dispute, a real dispute between the builder and the consumer about that, it's usually passed then through to the warranty body. And if it's within the first 2 years, it comes as a dispute to us. If it's after 2 years, then the warranty body would pick the matter up. So a lot of matters do get resolved at the point of supply. It's only the vexatious issues, the issues that can't be resolved, that come directly to us.
And Stu, as a matter of interest, how do your team deal with those sort of, the issues that you've just described that your clients will raise post-completion? What would be your, I hate to say standard response, but...
It will, to some degree, it is, isn't it? Of course, we always revert to the contract and say to a client, well, you entered into a contract with the builder. This is the implications of that contract. This is the advice we gave you on the contract. Now we're dealing with something that potentially falls outside that remit. Yeah, we just always invite them to go back to the builder in the first instance. We deal with a lot of the big builders across the UK, and most of them have what I would say is a fairly decent complaints or customer service department that are looking in this day and age to seek resolution. And I would say a massive percentage, if not all of the clients we've had that have had problems, have managed to resolve them direct with the builder without potentially going to the warranty provider. I don't think in my experience I've ever had any that have gone to the warranty provider. It's always been resolved with the builder. And I think in this day and age and social media and everything else, that the builders are very conscious of their reputation and conscious of the product they've built. Well, that's certainly our experience.
It's actually, Lorraine, it's quite interesting to think about the structure of the industry, because as Stu says, that's absolutely right. There are about 30 large builders in the UK who build about 80% of the homes that are built. So a lot of the problems are dealt with by them. And those companies are major companies, listed companies, who have their own complaints procedures in place. They have a system for dealing with those complaints, and it's in their best interest, of course, to make sure they don't become vexatious. So those builders are pretty well placed to manage that process. It's not to say they get it right all the time, they don't, but most of those builders have a pretty well developed complaints procedure.
So Noel, given that you've chaired an organisation that, as we discussed last time, clearly I think has assisted with making sort of demonstrable improvements for the consumer to the new build house buying process. We, and indeed your lovely self, are now faced with a new homes body, Noel, which I think's from the sounds of it just going to be shoving you guys out of the nest. So would you be kind enough to tell us what's coming, and in your professional opinion, why do we need another new homes body?
Well, unless you think I'm going off in a huff because of the new homes quality board, I better put that right, Lorraine. The reality is that there was always a desire to actually update the code, and what we've done during the last 10 years is we've had a review of the code to update it. We've got to a stage now where one of the big issues has been about the quality of build.
Yeah.
And so there was a decision taken a little while ago, which we have supported, for a new code to be developed, a totally new code, which has picked up on all the experience we've gained over the last 10 years, and also has added to that some of the major issues that have affected house buyers during that period, including the issue of build quality, which has received a lot of press publicity. So the new code, and I haven't seen the new code as yet, it's not yet been published, but the new code we believe will cover build quality, as well as strengthening a number of the areas that we deal with at the moment. So it's a positive move forward, and one which hopefully will benefit consumers and give them more support.
That's interesting though, Noel. I mean, just to pick you up there, you said you believe it will cover build quality. So that means we don't know yet.
Well, we're advised that that's what it will cover. I haven't seen the code, so I can't tell you in detail what that would be. And I think I would suggest you perhaps set up one of these meetings with the people who are developing the code there. And my main involvement has been to work with them on transition, which is my major concern. What I want to ensure is that because our code will be around still for the next 2 to 3 years, what I want to ensure is that the fact there are overlapping responsibilities for 2 to 3 years with our code and other codes that exist as well. I want to ensure that consumers are not confused by this. So one of the things I want to do is work with the New Homes Quality Board to make sure we have a seamless way for consumers to get support and advice during that transition period. And that will be true of other codes that exist as well. You probably appreciate that our code covers about 95% of the market, but there are about another 2 or 3 codes which are out there which deal with smaller portions of the market who are also having to manage this transition to the new code, which hopefully will be all embracing and cover all builders in the future. Do we know what the new code's going to be called? Yeah, it will be the New Homes Code. It has always been referred to as the New Homes Code, so I think that will be the final version of it. But we expect to see it published very shortly now. I would imagine, if not before Christmas, then very early in the new year. A new ombudsman has already been appointed, by the way.
That'll be nice Christmas reading for you then, Noel.
Indeed he will. Indeed he will.
So, and what's your view, Stu?
I think we discussed before we come out, it's, it can only be good for the clients that are buying these properties. I think historically with new build, there is a link to poor quality builds, and there's lots and lots and lots of press that surround that. So I think the builders generally do get a bit of a rough ride in some quarters. So focusing on the quality of the build moving forward, I think can only be a positive, because I would say that the clients we deal with, the biggest concern they have is that build and how it will end up looking, and what recourse there is. And I think, even though, we discuss with them, the warranties and guarantees that will be in place and so on and so forth, their biggest worry, nevertheless, is always the quality of that build.
I think one of the issues which have been associated with that is there have been 1 or 2 instances over a period of time where homes have been transferred to the buyer before they're complete. And you probably remember a fairly famous case that was reported in the national press where quite a lot of homes on a particular development had been they're given some incentive to buyers to occupy their homes before they were completed. So, a bathroom was missing, or a staircase hadn't been totally complete, or whatever it was, and so the homes were occupied before they were totally completed. Now the new code, I think, will address that particular problem as well, and I think that's an important step in the right direction too.
And will it be mandatory, Noel, or do developers sort of choose to subscribe to the code or not?
Well, the intention is that government will put in place a legal requirement for builders to comply with this new code, but that is not in place at the moment, and we're not quite sure when that will come in. And indeed, it may be that if there is a wholesale move towards the new code, in other words, all builders sign up to it and register with it, that the government may not put in place that strict requirement, and will watch to see whether in fact it operates by self-regulation. But certainly the government are making provision to require it by law.
Oh, okay. I mean, I feel they would avoid that if they could. I think, and I think also, lots of people would sort of put on social media, well, what's self-regulation ever done for us? And they might have a point, to be fair. So, Noel, clearly, and again, I'm sure we touched on this last time, and I appreciate there's not a great deal you can say, but I don't think we can talk about sort of, property and issues around property without mentioning the C word, of course, without mentioning cladding. And I was wondering, is the new code a sort of reaction to, the absolute tragedy of Grenfell and everything that's come after it, or was the new homes code sort of on the stocks before that, and really the whole issue of the cladding crisis has just brought this issue right into centre stage?
Well, I think the code has been developed without cladding being an issue, and whether it will be able to cover that sort of issue, I can't tell you at the moment at all, Lorraine. All I would say is that there's been a long history of issues in relation to building products. In a former life, I was a director of a trading standards department, and I remember over 20 years ago, a law was introduced from the European Union called the Construction Products Directive, and that was put into law in the UK, but unfortunately there was no resource to actually enforce that law. So any control on the quality of construction products was rather left in limbo. There is now a new move to actually strengthen that position to make sure that products in future are controlled by legal requirements, and I think within government at the moment there is a unit being set up to do just that, and that will need to be appropriately resourced to do it, clearly. So watch this space. They will have responsibility for issues of building the quality of building products, and also things like cladding. So that will be where we look in future, I think, to see some resolution of that problem. But I would say that just an observation from my perspective as someone who has always been interested in consumer affairs and been an advocate for consumers, there is a real issue here for thousands and thousands of consumers who haven't been protected in buying a home, which they put a lot of resource into and are now facing huge consequences as a result of no provision for that. So I think it's really urgent. There is provision put in place to protect consumers going forward from issues that can't be predicted at this point. There may be other issues come up in the future that we can't predict. But consumers who buy a house need to be protected from problems that they cannot foresee and were not foreseen at the time they buy it. So that's a really urgent issue that needs to be addressed at the highest level.
Yeah, I think you're right, Noel. And I think one of the concerns, particularly in relation to really for consumers, I mean, even as a property lawyer, and Stu, you might concur here, you still sometimes often feel that you're on the outside looking in, and you do feel that, and a cladding would be, the worst but most obvious example, is that nobody is taking ownership of the problem, when there are a number of bodies, a number of organisations that perhaps could have some involvement, responsibility, legal responsibility. Everyone's always very hastily saying, well, actually, no, that's not my problem, Gov. And you get something as terrible as the cladding crisis, which is just falling between all of the stools. And that feels very wrong. And that feels, that the people who are least able to cope with it are left to deal with the consequences, really. So all the bodies in the world aren't helping those people.
I think it's a very fair point, and I think there are other issues you've not mentioned, like tenancy issues, for example, and some of the problems we've seen on national television recently of properties that are not fit for habitation. I mean, there are a whole range of issues that affect people, and these are fundamental issues. These are about the homes we live in. And I think consumers deserve a seamless access to the help that's there to support them. And also we need to make sure that that help is reinforced, to make sure some of the issues that haven't been adequately dealt with in the past, like cladding and the fitness of property, are covered in the future. So there's a big challenge here for government, I think, to pick this up.
Noel, it sounds to me, are you going to leave your role as chair of the code and become sort of more of an independent, vocal consumer advocate lobbying government? You sound brilliantly placed to do it, I have to say, from hearing you talk.
Well, I have a broader interest in that. I do currently chair the board of the Chartered Trading Standards Institute, and that was a temporary thing, and I'm standing down from that shortly. But one of the things I do for the Chartered Trading Standards Institute, which is my professional institute, is I am a vice president of that institute, and will continue to take a keen interest in consumer matters going forward, not just in the building industry and the home buying industry, but more broadly as well.
Well, that I'm glad to hear it, because you sound like the perfect advocate. And we get, there's very few people, Noel, who have sort of, and it sounds a bit cliched, but sort of sufficient passion, but also real depth of understanding of these issues. I mean, Stu, I don't know about you, but and this is perhaps, I don't know, the wrong thing to say, but I sometimes feel quite sort of under-equipped as a property lawyer sometimes when clients are faced with a lot of these issues, which, to be fair, as you and I have touched on before, are often potentially litigation matters, aren't they, as far as we're concerned?
Yeah, without a shadow of a doubt. You always feel, I think you used the word, you feel on the outside when it comes to some of these matters. And, whether it be from our regulatory bodies or wherever, we kind of, get this information right at the back end, don't we? And of course, we're at the front end when it comes to speaking to clients. So there definitely is, a disjointed process there. But yeah.
Could I throw out a lifeline at that point, Lorraine? Because I can feel the need for one, perhaps. I mean, we have put out from our code recently, and I'm sure the new code will do something similar in the future as well. We have put out guidance for lawyers about what they can do to get better information about how their clients are protected, particularly under the code and presumably the new code as well. We put that out recently. We have a special site on a special section of our website for lawyers, so that lawyers can get direct information to understand what the code does for them and how it protects them. And one of the other things that we've done over the last period since we last spoke, I think, is to reinforce the information we put out through estate agents as well.
That's interesting.
Estate agents, who of course are quite often brought into the sales process. A lot of major builders, of course, run their own sites and have their own sales staff on the sites. But a large number also use agents to, perhaps towards the end of the site sales process, to engage. And one of the problems we've had over the last 10 years is making sure that agents understand what they're supposed to be doing in terms of passing this information on. And that's partly been a bit of a problem for the builders, because we've been saying to builders, if you're putting an agent in place, they need to know what they should be doing for you to comply with the code and to comply with criminal law as well. Criminal law also binds on the sales of new homes. And you may recall the old Trade Descriptions Act that used to be regularly quoted by Esther Ranson and others.
Yes.
And the Trade Descriptions Act has been superseded, and the Trade Descriptions Act never covered property. But the regulations that replaced it do cover property. So there are criminal offences that may arise as a result of mis-selling. And so that's something that's picked up by my trading standards colleagues. So it's really important that agents, as well as builders, know that they are in a vulnerable position if they make statements that they get incorrect. So it's very important the builder gives all the right information to the agent in the selling process, contracts the agent to make sure they sell the houses according to what that information is, and make no false statements to consumers. Otherwise, both the agent and possibly the builder themselves could also be vulnerable under criminal law, not just a consumer code.
Oh, that's interesting. So Noel, what in a nutshell, what is your guidance for the lawyers? Sort of, how long is it? What form does it take? What's it pointing out to them? Is it a link on the website? Can we give that to people?
Yeah. If you just Google consumer code for home builders, you can get straight onto the website. Go into the lawyer section on the website. All the information that a lawyer needs is there, ready for them. We equally have a site for builders, for consumers as well. So lawyers have got their own special site there, and they get all the information they require. If they need anything further, there's a reference point for them as well. So a lot of information already available.
Oh, that's interesting. So will it's part of your remit, Noel, to work with the the people that will end up running the new homes code to try to ensure that, well, that you dovetail, and will you be, for example, putting out sort of joint content as to where people go if there's a problem?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is one of the really important things, actually, Lorraine. Clearly, communication is a vital issue at this point. And we've had several meetings with the new code board already, and we have an agreement in place that we will liaise on the process of communication. Really important for the industry, because you probably appreciate, a builder, they won't have seen the new code as yet. When they come to comply with this new code, it's going to take them some while to gear up to do that. So there will be a transition period where they are training their staff to comply with the new code. They're still complying with our code, and that will need careful management as far as they're concerned. So we need to communicate information to them, make sure they've got all the information they need to do that. But also for consumers, we need to make it just simple for consumers to get the right help when they need it. So we need to direct them to either the new code, if the house was built under the new code, or if it's one that was still being dealt with by the old code, they need to be seamlessly transferred to the right source of help. And that's what we're endeavouring to do. So communication is vital.
Well, Stu, I can see that you and all conveyancers are going to need that information to some degree, aren't you? So you need to know where to tell clients to go.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's such an interesting conversation, because I could listen to Noel all day long, because it's such a everything you say you kind of absorb. And from a lawyer's point of view, we do get a lot of clients, whether it be mainly following completion, that do have these issues, and having a guide on the website, stuff like that. I wasn't aware of that. So the first thing I'll be doing when I put down this conversation is having a look at that, and potentially looking to incorporate that into some of our standard reports to try and head off maybe some of our involvement and push them in the right direction, should we say.
Well, it covers a lot of things that are really relevant to lawyers. The reservation agreement, when that's put in place, there was a clear requirement for information to go into that, and obviously when it comes to exchange of contracts, there's a lot of support there for lawyers as well at that particular critical point when final decisions have been made on the property and what it is they have been agreed to buy, and the description of that property. Clearly all very important bits of information which the lawyer will want to hand before completion.
Yeah, I think I hope the new code, well, and frankly the people running it, Noel, are half as competent as you, I have to say. They've got a bit of a job on their hands following you.
But well, for sure, if I go for another job, I'll come to you for a reference, Lorraine. Thank you.
just put the YouTube link, Noel, it'll be fine. So I thought it would be good to sort of just conclude with your reflections over the last 20 months. But I have to say, Noel, and it's a bit of a cop-out question in a way, but is there anything else about the new code that you would particularly want to emphasize, in case Stu or I haven't mentioned it, that we haven't already talked about?
No, I think we've covered that ground. I mean, I would just say that in conclusion that there's been a sea change in attitudes within the industry over the last 10 years. So I wouldn't like to leave the impression that we've got an industry that is desperately struggling to provide good product and a good return for consumers. Many companies now are very focused on improving their consumer presentation. I think they've seen the bad press that comes from getting it wrong, and the damage that does to companies, the damage it does to individuals within companies as well. So I think there's been a sea change in attitude in the major companies particularly, but also smaller ones too, to try and make sure they're dealing fairly with consumers. They have in place complaints procedures to make sure complaints don't become vexatious, and they actually deal with legitimate claims for help and support when they get them. So I think there has been a sea change in attitude. I think we've seen over the last 10 years a great improvement in the way in which the consumer is dealt with. But that's not to say it's perfect. There's still a way to go. And I think some of the new issues that have come up, we've talked about this morning, like the ground rent issue, for example, we haven't touched on this morning, but the ground rent issue that came in a couple of years ago, where was a practice which clearly was bad news for consumers. The cladding issue, which has been a major issue and still a vexatious issue for consumers, there is still a way to go in making sure that responsibility is owned by the industry when it comes to consumer detriment.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. I mean, my own view on the cladding, and I was, again, with no political side whatsoever, but I was very pleased to see Michael Gove at least come in and you know, put a stop on the loans, you know, idea for leaseholders, and just really sort of, you know, kick back and try and have a bit of review. But and again, Stu, you might have a view on this, but my view was that you know, I reckoned that the government would really only start to get hold of the cladding crisis when it really started to have a material detriment on the property market, when you've got enough people that were trying to sell flats that were actually...
We're here though, aren't we? Sure, you know, we're here at that point now. It's taken some time.
Well, I'm not sure we are though, are we? Because we've had the because we've had the SDLT holiday. All you've heard is, all we've heard for the last year is how busy everyone's been, how fantastic the market's been, and how many stamp duty land tax receipts the Treasury's got. True. I think now we're starting to contract back. We might actually see the reality of the cladding crisis, in the sense that I've always had this view that it's only when it actually materially is seen to impact on, you know, a wider part of the market, when that potentially might be hitting stamp duty, land tax receipts, maybe that you know, the government might really sort of, you know, get its hands on it. But what sort of, you know, what sort of I'm
not sure at their level whether the stamp duty scenario is of that greater ilk.
Maybe not.
You know, obviously, you know, in terms of the volumes that are pushed through, I'm not sure whether that's of concern to them, but the mere fact it's been mentioned now, you'd sincerely hope, wouldn't you, that it's on the radar. And I think you've mentioned this before. The problem with the government at the moment is there are so many issues and topics that are on their radar to whatever extent, and it's getting it over the line, isn't it? That's the problem. It's actually getting it addressed.
Yeah. But
so
Noel, your reflections then on your work over the last 20 months, is there anything you noticed kind of, you know, differently, sort of, you know, during and post pandemic, or semi post pandemic, depending on where we are, or have things been, you know, different, or have they been much the same for you?
Well, I mean, the industry, of course, has been challenged by this as well, because they've had the task of trying to show potential consumers around homes without putting them at risk. And that's also played into our agenda as well, because one of the things we do is we send out teams of inspectors to look at the sales process to make sure it's complying with the code. And they report back to us, and we take action if we find the situation is wanting. Well, we haven't been able to send some of our inspectors onto sites recently, so we've had to do it virtually. So we've been doing that virtually, and we may continue to do that partially. No, we won't do it entirely, but we will still do that in some areas, because we can move quite quickly doing it virtually. We can cover the country quite easily without moving. But we do a virtual inspection and see what's on site. Sometimes, of course, we can only do it properly by visiting the site. So we will have a mix and match process going forward, I think.
Excellent. Well, Noel, again, I think Stu will chime with this. It's again just been an absolute delight to chat with you. I can't believe that half an hour has gone by so quickly. You are such an absolute mine of information, and really hugely relevant for consumers, but their conveyancers as well. So I think we will definitely be watching this space carefully for the new code, and you might perhaps have the dubious honour, Noel, of being maybe the first guest that comes back for a third time, because I suspect there'll be more conversations to be had. What do you think, Stu?
Most definitely. It's always great, isn't it, to listen to somebody that's a master on their subject, shall we say?
Well, and also interesting and able to speak, because frankly, quite a lot of masters on their subject. You wouldn't really want to listen to them for too long. Well, Noel, it's been genuinely a real delight to have you back, and I'm really, really thrilled that you were prepared to come and talk to us. And we'll definitely put the information out there about the the new content on your website, because as you say, I suspect you'll have you'll have work to do for the next 2 or 3 years, I would guess. Probably the most challenging time is about to come.
You could well be right. Anyway, it's been fine talking to you. Thank you, Lorraine. Thank you, Stu. Much appreciated.
No problems. Take care, Noel.
See you soon.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
See ya.